Hello and welcome. Today's video is going to be exploring the basics of stress and exploring why do we experience stress, and more importantly, why do I experience stress about something but the other person doesn't experience stress? What is the difference there? Let's go. Stress is a response to a stressor, right? A stressor is an arbitrary life event which occurs. Anything in life has the potential to be a stressor. Your neighbor can be a stressor. Losing your keys can be a stressor. Driving to work can be a stressor. But stresses in and of themselves don't lead to stress. Our perception of those stresses is what determines whether we have a stress response or not, right? So let's look at losing your house key, for example. That's a stressor. Losing your key is the potential to be a stressful event, depending on how we perceive that. Okay, so you're walking along, you get to the shops, you take out your keys, you realize that your house key is missing for whatever reason. If you are going through a really messy separation or a really messy divorce and someone's stalking you, you might see that act of losing the key as being something really, really terrible. So, well, what if they were following me and they found that key and now they're going to go home? Maybe you look at losing your key and saying, well, I've lost my key once before, someone got into my house and they stole all my belongings, right? Looking at that event, that stressor of losing the key in that way, imbues that stressor with negative significance and it leads to a stress response, right? If, for example, you looked at the losing of the house key and you go, well, okay, I've lost it. It's no big deal. There's someone at home. I don't have to worry about that. I live in a gated community. I've lost it somewhere where just any random person might pick up a key. There's nothing identifiable on the key. There's no address on the key. There's nothing like that. Perceiving something in that way, you've either imbued it with neutral significance or positive significance. When you abuse stresses, when you perceive stresses and you perceive them with neutral or positive significance, you don't have a stress response. Does that make sense? So only those things that we imbue with negative significance will lead to a stress response. So what is the purpose of cognitive restructuring or cognitive reframing then? That is to alter our default setting of perceiving things, especially when our default setting is geared towards a negative, or we have certain schemas in place which gear us towards a negative, right? So if we look at cognitive distortions, these are mental shortcuts that we have, and mental distortions, for the most part, lead to negative ways of perceiving things, right? So the more the more cognitive distortions that you have, the higher proportion of stresses you are likely to imbue with negative significance. So you say, okay, well, how do I minimize or reduce the amount of things that occur, stresses, with negative significance? Well, manage the cognitive distortions, right? As soon as you can get on top of those cognitive distortions, you can begin to minimize and alter the way that you perceive these stresses, right? It's the same for schemas. If you have a mistrust schema, for example, everything that which occurs in life gets filtered through that mistrust schema. And the way that I kind of explain that one is, if you're walking down a busy road, you have a mistrust schema, someone accidentally bumps into you, the mistrust schema will automatically lead you to think that someone is trying to cause you harm. They're trying to steal your money. They've got a knife and they're going to try and stab you. That, of course, is negative significance, right? Which leads to a stress response. If you have a trust schema, though, you can walk down that same busy road, someone bumps you, oops, that was an accident, they didn't mean to, it's a busy road, what do you expect is going to happen, right? In that situation, you're imbuing the same event with neutral or positive significance, right? And that also explains why some people have a stress response in one thing and other people don't. We're different, and it depends, again, on how we are perceiving this stressor, right? And whether we are perceiving this stressor and imbuing it with negative significance or neutral or positive significance, right? So the ultimate aim of stress reduction, well, actually, let's go back to the cognitive reframing, sorry. So cognitive reframing, what is the purpose of that? The purpose is to increase cognitive flexibility, increase the ways in which we can perceive things which have occurred, right? And increase the ways in which we can perceive the impact of those things on us, right? So again, if we look at the situation of losing the keys, Yes, one possibility is someone's going to pick up the key, know where we live, go into our house and steal all our belongings, right? That's a possibility. Another possibility is someone picks it up, they go and hand it in, and then nothing happens, you know what I mean? No one ever gets hold of the key again. It just goes in the bin later. Another possibility is nothing occurs, you know what I mean? It just sits on the street forever, gets washed down the drain when it rains, and so be it. But if we fixate on one idea and one idea only, and that idea is of such a magnitude that there's no other alternative but to imbue that event with negative significance, then obviously we're going to experience a stress response. So we may look at the house key situation, right? We've lost the key. We perceive it as being, well, this is a bad thing because now someone's going to find it. That's what happened last time. They found the key, they broke into the house, and they stole everything. Yes, you can have that thought. Cognitive reframing and cognitive restructuring will come in and say, okay, well, let's challenge this thought. What is the likelihood of this, right? What if you're overseas and you lost that house key? Does that matter then? What is the chance then that someone's going to pick up their key and go to your house and steal everything, right? So when you challenge that thought and go, well, actually, I'm overseas, it's not possible for them to pick up that key and know which house I live in back in Australia, right? So that act of reframing and that act of engaging in cognitive flexibility now leads you to have a neutral or positive, imbue that event with neutral or positive significance, and now your stress response goes away. Does that make sense? So the essence of stress management is reducing the frequency in which you imbue stresses with negative significance. Obviously, there's things in life where you don't actively try and alter the way that you perceive something. Like if you look at the death of a loved one, for example, you go to a funeral, you wouldn't go into that situation and say, well, I'm not going to imbue this with negative significance and start crying. I'm going to be all happy and say, hey, yeah, I'm glad she's dead. You know what I mean? That's not the way it works. So in those situations, the stress response is warranted. In a lot of areas in our life, though, a stress response is not always warranted. And the problem with always imbuing or frequently imbuing stresses with negative significance, it leads to chronic stress, and it leads to chronic stress overload, allostatic overload, right? What happens then? When we're stressed in one area, stressed in two areas, stressed in 5 areas, our ability to handle each of those different stresses lowers, right? It becomes harder for us. We become more irritable. We become more stressed. We become more anxious. We become more frustrated. We're less tolerant of people and things like that, right? So that's why it's really important to just minimize the frequency in which we imbue stresses with negative significance so that we're not stressed every single time we perceive something which occurs in our life. Make sense? There we go.